So, welcome back to the Female Property Expert podcast. Today, we have a special guest joining us on the show, Michael Primrose. Say hello.
Thanks very much for having me.
That's all right. He's the owner of the Property Finance Collective and the Property Finance Academy. Now, Michael is a seasoned commercial finance broker. He has a wealth of experience in development finance, in bridging loans, and commercial mortgages. His passion kind of for creating or having creative finance and the knack that he has for structuring deals have helped countless first-time developers and investors kickstart their property careers. With a background spanning from conveyancing to estate agency, Michael has paved his way to becoming the youngest owner of a commercial finance brokerage in the country, which is a very good accolade to have. Alongside this, he runs a successful training company, educating investors and developers on raising finance, and hosts a thriving podcast of his own. So, we're going to get ready to dive deep into the current lending market conditions with Michael and myself today. So, let's start with finding a little bit more about you, Michael. So you've had a very impressive journey as a finance broker and have worked with, I cannot tell you how many property developers. You probably can, but I can't. I know a number of them personally that you've worked with. Can you share with us how you, I suppose, got started in the industry and what motivated you to pursue a career as a finance broker?
Yeah, so nothing possessed me to start as a finance broker whatsoever. It was completely and utterly accidental. So what happened was I was a conveyancer, then went into estate agency, back into conveyancing. And I've always been in property, literally since the age of 17, 18. Um, got into my second batch of conveyancing, got made redundant just as my, I think, second daughter was about to be born. First daughter? No, first daughter. First daughter was about to be born. And so it was very much a case of I'm about to become a first time dad at the age of 22, I will say. And sort of sat there and went, right, okay, what do I do? I've been made redundant. When I say the timescale, I mean, I was made redundant in the August, I think it was, and she was born in the October. So, I mean, it really was pretty close.
Yeah.
But yeah, literally went for the first job that appeared on Indeed, which was to be a commercial finance broker. It was a sales role. Went and did the interview, and he was sort of like, "Oh, I haven't really got anything at the moment, but if you can pull on a client, so if you can go out kind of in your own time, unpaid, and go and find a client," which to be honest took the mickey a bit, really. I think he was just using me for a bit of free work. But you see, if you can pull on a client, then what we'll do is we'll look at it, and actually at that point you've got a client. I can see the benefits of X, Y, Z. Sort of spent loads and loads of time throughout the August trying to find a client, and finally managed to find one who I still actually work with today, sort of 7 years later. And yeah, went back and said, I've pulled on this client and this is what they need, X, Y, Z. And he was like, right, great, okay. Well, you start on Monday. And I went, right, brilliant, okay, let's go in. And I had no idea what I was doing. Started off in business finance. And between what was a team of, I think it's about six of us then, we sort of went and decided to dabble into property a bit more rather than business finance. And yeah, the next 18 months, 2 years, built up a really, really good commercial finance brokerage, especially in property development finance, for sort of first time developers. And I think that's where you and I first met, was on the White Box Academy, I think it was. And yeah, just from there, it kind of got to a point where I thought, well, actually, I kind of want to do this by myself. Like I can see not necessarily a talent, but I can see that I've got kind of a passion for this, and I want to go and build something for myself. Um, so then left and then started the Property Finance Guy, which now I've been going since November 2018, which has spiraled into the Property Finance Collective because we took on quite a number of female members of staff and diversity and all that. We had to obviously then be the Property Finance Collective. So yeah, we did that, and we've been going about 5 years now, and completely accidental. I had no idea I was ever going to do it, and it's all just spiraled out of one redundancy. It's just kind of, yeah, just sheer panic of trying to find something has led to 7 years in my own business somehow.
That's an amazing achievement as well, especially if you weren't planning on going into the industry overall. You know, what you've achieved in those short 7 years is brilliant. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, it was quite nice being the 24. I was the youngest to set one up, and I think I sort of held that accolade for probably 3 or 4 years. I think now as I'll be 30 this year, so I don't think I'm the youngest anymore. There's a lot of younger guys coming into the industry, but yeah, we are still one of the sort of youngest average age. It's a very, very elderly industry. It's commercial finance. There's a ex-bankers, everything else, so they're all mid 40s and higher. So yeah, it's a weird industry to be in as someone in your 20s.
But I suppose you bring fresh perspective to the industry, coming in with no preconceived ideas. You come in almost as a blank canvas and you build your own stage, which is a lovely position to be in, learning on the job, but also creating or carving out part of the market for yourself.
Yeah, it was just I think what we managed to achieve in the first couple of years, and I think yeah, we made a lot of noise in the first 3 or 4 years, and we've quieted off a bit now because, in all honesty, we're just too busy to keep shouting out everywhere all the time. But I do want to get back to that point of because it was great because we carved out this section of the industry for 2 or 3 years and it was going great and lenders were loving it and everything else. And then COVID hit and the Ukraine war and everything else has hit. So now it's kind of that point of everyone's kind of gone back to their old bad habits again. And
Yeah,
it would be nice to get back out and yeah, shake up the market again if we can, I think.
absolutely. So, turning our attention to the market, can you give the listeners an update on the current lending conditions that are rife at the moment, should I say?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of where we're at, we're at the point of recording this, we're at 5.25 still as the base rate, which obviously is substantially higher than it was a couple of years ago. I remember the days of doing a precise, it feels so weird saying that I remember the days of as if they were decades and decades ago, but it was only a couple of years ago we were putting precise buy to lets out at 2.99, 3.19, and
Those
now
days are
rates are,
gone.
oh, those days are long gone, I think. So yeah, at the moment, I think obviously we're coming up to a general election whenever he decides to announce it. But I think realistically, May is probably when it's going to happen, May or June. And there's a big push now, realistically, to now try and show themselves as the right option. And who
Mhm.
knows what we're going to end up with. But in terms of where we're at, obviously inflation is coming down, or how they measure inflation is coming down. The SONIA swap rates have come down. So in terms of a medium to short term view, I think rates are going to stay very similar to where they are now in terms of your fives, your five and a halves that are out there at the moment. But as a long term view, I think realistically within the next 6 to 9 months, and without having a crystal ball, it's really difficult to say, but within the next 6 to 9 months, I think realistically we're going to get down to that 4.25, 4.5% mark in terms of banks' interest rates. Where we get to in terms of the Bank of England base rate, I don't know. But in terms of where lenders are going to be lending at, I think it's going to be around that sort of mid four level. And I think that will come pretty quickly, sort of 6 to 9 months. In terms of bridging and development finance, I mean, they've never been based realistically off the Bank of England base rate anyway, because a lot of it is private money. So a lot of the guys, although they went from being in sort of the 0.7s, 0.8s to being into the 0.9s and 1% mark, a lot of them now have come back down. They've got more assurances in the market, I think, more willingness to throw money around. So a lot of those guys are now coming back down to those 0.7s, 0.8s. We're seeing some really, really nice interest rates. I mean, 0.73 is one that got banded around this morning on a bridge, which is lovely compared to where we've been the last couple of years. So, yeah, in terms of where the market's at, I think there's confidence that's come back. Sales are still taking a long time. Solicitors are still incredibly slow. I don't think that's ever going to change. But in terms of lenders want to get money out, that's kind of the crux of all of this. Is they want to get that money out because they've sat on it for. I remember going through COVID and being like, "Oh yeah, lenders have sat on their money for the last 2 years. They want to get it back out again." And then the Ukraine war happened, and it's like, okay, lenders have been sat on their money again. And then Liz Truss happened and everything else. So she, I can't remember how many days she was in office. In the end, about 6 weeks, I think.
So
Um,
45 days, I think, from memory.
Something like that. Yeah. So what she managed to achieve in that short period of time was rather impressive.
Mm.
But since then, obviously, the whole fallout from all of that we're still reeling from now, again, lenders have sat on their money. A lot of them have been overly cautious, and a lot of property investors and developers have been cautious. And I think as it was with COVID, a couple of years goes by, everyone just starts to get a bit bored, starts to get a bit, I've got to do something, I've got to get out there, just a bit stir crazy. And I think we're hitting that point again now. So as long as nothing mad happens again in the world, which it probably will do, but let's hope and pray that just for a few months we get a bit of stability. There's going to be a huge pumping of money going into the market, I think. Lenders have got to lend. A lot of them are getting to the point now where they've sat on this money 2, possibly even 3 years, depending on how long they've gone, and they're paying interest on that money as well. So they're making minimal margins on a lot of the stuff that they're lending out on. Something's got to change pretty soon. But in terms of the market overall, I mean, the first quarter so far of this year compared to last quarter of last year, the last quarter of 2023, we were probably the least busy we've ever been. And talking to other brokers and lenders and everything else, they had the same issue. The first quarter of this year, so first quarter of 2024, is probably the busiest we've ever been.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that weird transition of going from being 3 months of literally sitting on your hands going, right, okay, are we going to survive this? And there were those genuine conversations of, are we actually going to get through this? And a lot of lenders went bust, a lot of brokers went bust because they just didn't have the resources to cope with that super slow 3 months. But now coming into this 3 months, it's now right, oh, okay, is this a blip? Is it actually going to carry on like this? Can we now expand and grow and everything else? But I think it's a good telltale sign that people are ready to start chucking some money out again. So the market is looking positive as far as I'm concerned.
That is definitely good news. So what types of properties or investment projects are the lenders steering towards from a finance point of view at the moment? Is there
So
anything in particular that the lenders are quite keen to lend on? Is it developments, buy-to-lets? What have you seen?
yeah, so across the board, I mean, your vanilla buy-to-lets are always going to be the ones that they're going to pump the most money into. It's the safest investment for them. But when you get into the more creative stuff, so looking at commercial conversions, that especially with some of the recent changes as well, lenders are really, really pushing cash into that at a rate or not. So they really want to get involved in commercial conversions. They see them as a moderate risk rather than new build stuff, which is sort of deemed as high risk. So commercial conversions is a big one. Title splitting as well is another big one as well. That's something I'm very passionate about and something that pushing a lot of people to look into in more detail. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of bridging lenders now who are churning money into these blocks of flats. They're probably the two biggest ones at the moment, I would say.
That's interesting as well. I never really thought of title splitting as being something of a priority at the moment, but if the lenders are lending on it, then it's definitely something to consider.
Well, it's born out of the interest rate increases because all of these landlords that were holding big freehold blocks of flats, all of a sudden their interest rates have gone like that. They just can't afford to carry on. And because they're borrowing, and the other thing as well is it's not only that, it's they can't leverage up as much as they want to, they can't be bothered or they're tired or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of these blocks coming to the market and they're just looking for maybe someone who's a bit fresher to the market to take them on. But yeah, taking freehold blocks of flats and splitting them into individual leaseholds, absolutely without a shadow of a doubt, is a lot of lenders want to be involved in that. And a lot of investors are involved in it as well. I've never seen, in terms of a strategy, I think the last one that kind of boomed out like this one is probably service accommodation.
Yeah.
That was the last kind of big boom. But lenders have been able to get their heads around this quicker than they did service accommodation. Service
Yeah.
accommodation, they just could not get their heads around it. They weren't keen on it. All of the horror stories to do with it and everything else, they just couldn't get their heads around it. Whereas title splitting, it's much easier for them to get their heads around. It's a very simple transaction. So yeah, from that perspective, I think that's why there's definitely a lot more push towards that than some of the other stuff that we've seen.
Yeah. Understandable. I suppose there's less risk as well exposed to them. They already have the asset there. So it's less risk.
And it ends up on an AST as well, which for them is a slightly better security than these nightly rentals.
Yeah. So obviously over the last few months I've experienced this myself, but the lenders' conditions have changed, especially in recent years actually, but I've probably experienced it more myself as I've started going back out and getting more borrowing. What factors do you think have influenced those changes?
I mean, there's a few different ones. I would say there's the compliance changes and then there's the sort of funding line requirements. So the compliance changes are just driven by the FCA tightening their belts on numerous different things. And I think trying to get involved in the unregulated market a bit more. They very much, I think, want to now push the regulated market, the unregulated market to be more regulated. But similarly as well with that whole scandal with the motor industry where they were getting huge, huge fees that weren't being declared and everything else, it kind of has a knock-on effect for everything else. Anything that happens in any of the other finance industries, whether it be agricultural, motor industry, plant, anything like that, you end up kind of pushing it into property as well. So the FCA just put this kind of broad stroke approach on everything. So there's been a lot of compliance changes, which a lot of lenders have had to get used to pretty quickly. So that hasn't helped. All the anti-money laundering stuff that comes in as well, that more requirements that need to be dealt with. So just going for a bridging loan isn't as simple as it used to be. There's now so many more requirements, so much more paperwork that's required, so much more information that the lender needs to see before they can even make a decision, which is not ideal in any capacity. But then on top of that, you've got with obviously all the changes with COVID coming in and everything else, and obviously Ukraine war and the economy nearly collapsing. There's obviously a lot more tightening up from funding lines as well. They want to make sure that they're lending on the right projects, that they're not exposed to risky projects or anything like that. So again, there's a lot more due diligence done by them. Whereas sort of 3-4 years ago, we were looking at bridges and it was like, there's 12 lenders here that will literally just throw you the money.
Yeah.
Now it's like, well, okay, there's 3 or 4 lenders, but they need you to jump through 14 different hoops. You need your inside leg measurement and everything else. So this unregulated market is now acting like a regulated market, and getting a bridge is almost as painful as getting a buy-to-let or a commercial mortgage. And same with development finance as well, which it does have its complications because people go for this kind of finance because they believe it to be simple, because they believe it to be easy, because the biggest benefit of bridging was always it's quick, it's easy, it's not very intensive. But yeah, these shifts have overcomplicated a few aspects of it. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of lenders we still work with who don't have all those requirements. But yeah, there's a few that unfortunately, because of their funding lines, have just had to become more like a regulated lender than an unregulated one. So yeah, there's lots of different changes kind of all across the board, all leading towards, I think, bridging and development just becoming that little bit more paperwork intensive, unfortunately. But if you prep for it, then it's one of those things where it's just another bit of paper that you have to fill in, isn't it? And it's always the way. There will come a point where a mortgage will take you a tree, I think. It's just, yeah, it's getting a bit.
Madness, isn't it? The paperwork has definitely increased over the years. I can vouch for that. It has a lot more onerous in regards to the level of detail that you have to share now, even with current projects that you've got going on. When you're looking for lending for a new project, they want to know the exposed risks of the current projects, whereas before you just had to give them an asset list. So I've noticed a lot of changes in the lending criteria, I suppose. But it can only be a good thing. I know paperwork's annoying and it's very frustrating, but in a way, you know that when they're lending to you, your deal is good. It's secure, because they wouldn't lend if they thought that it was of an exposed risk to them.
Yeah, that's the key thing, because a lot of the lenders who were lending 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they were lending knowing full well that, okay, this is a bit of a borderline deal, we're just going to keep it. And there was this mentality, there's a couple of lenders in particular who literally built their businesses and portfolios on repossessions.
Yeah.
Actually, by taking on bad assets, they didn't mind. But yeah, I do like where the market is at the moment. I think the due diligence that they go into can't be a bad thing. Like you said, if you can take a project to a lender and they can rubber stamp it and say, this is a good deal, it's well worth looking at them.
Just supports your initial assessments anyway.
Oh, it does, big time. Yeah, and it just makes you feel like you're doing something right.
So finally, I won't try and keep you for too long, but finally, are there any sort of additional tips or insights that you can share to help property investors, maybe new ones or seasoned ones, navigate the current financial market effectively and kind of maximize their investment returns? Is there anything
Yeah,
in your
so
tool belt?
there's a fair bit. In terms of, I guess my first tip is, if you're going to bring a broker on board, remember that they're there to help you rather than hinder you. So hiding things from your broker is probably the worst thing that you can do, especially if you're then going to 2 months down the line say, oh, well, this is all falling apart. It's your fault. Oh, yeah, I know I didn't tell you about X, Y, and Z, and I know I didn't tell you about all these CCJs and all these defaults and this bankruptcy and this IVA and everything else I've got going on. Just remember the brokers there tell you they can only work with what they're told. They're not mind readers or anything like that. So that'd be my first tip is using your broker as effectively as. And in terms of maximizing sort of how far your money spreads, I'd start to look into creative strategies, which literally talk about that for hours and hours and hours. But the first one will be things like title splitting, where you can reduce your deposit, looking at deferred payments, looking at option agreements, looking at bridging below market value, all of these different creative strategies that you can bring in. I would look into those pretty aggressively, because if you can spread how far your money's going or how little money you've got in each deal and just reduce your own risk personally, then it can only be a good thing to do that. So I think that's where all of my efforts would be as a first time investor or developer, would be focusing on the more creative stuff.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last point that I would raise is about getting all your stuff ready, like we spoke about a second ago, with lenders' criteria changes and the amount of information they want and everything else. I would definitely make sure that you've got a Google Drive somewhere, or a OneDrive, or whatever one people use these days. I'll just use Google, so that's the only one I can remember. But I'd have a G Drive somewhere that literally has your last 3 months bank statements for the business, you personally, your project. The thing is, every time you go out for an investor or anything like that, you're creating a pack, an investor pack, with all your previous projects, everything else. And people seem to put so much more effort into the packs that they create for investors as opposed to the packs that they create for the lenders.
Yeah.
And I always think, to a degree, that they should be one and the same, because the lenders are investing in you, and actually, to a degree, they're investing a hell of a lot more than a private investor is. So for every deal that you look at or start to look at finance on, I would create an investor pack, because then every time you go for a development deal and the lender turns around and says, oh, what have you worked on, or what have you done, or XYZ, you just send them an investor pack, or you send them a couple of investor packs for ones you've done previously, and show, oh yeah, this is what we've got going on, this is what we've done. And because in every investor pack, you're always going to have a breakdown of the deals that you've looked at. So I would just keep adding to an investor pack and have that ready to go on every deal. And then when it comes to your build, probably more for first time developers, when it comes to your build cost, don't worry too much about having every pound and penny accounted for when you first go for finance, because the amount of people I see who spend 5, 6, 7 hours coming up with this immaculate spreadsheet where all the bricks are detailed down and pounds and pennies of everything are all broken down, and then you get it over to the lender and they tear it apart and they say, well, actually can't do this, or this doesn't look right, or you've forgotten this, you haven't done that. Or the amount of times they do this spreadsheet and then actually it's not looked at until way down the line. So I would just try and get your headline figures right to begin with. Let the lender have a look over it. Let the lender say, yeah, okay, yeah, this project looks all right. Looks like the numbers stack up, the area stacks up, demand stacks up, everything else. Use that lender as your kind of first, can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but your first
Sounding board almost.
that's it, your first sounding board, yeah, and just let them come back and confirm that it all looks all right. And then if at that point it looks all right, then put the time and the effort into coming up with the spreadsheets and everything else, because otherwise you can end up spending, like I said, 6, 7, 8 hours just on one spreadsheet for a deal that doesn't stack up. But being able to have access to brokers, lenders, etc., as sounding boards, just means you can cut that time down that you spend on every deal. And they are probably my top 3 tips, I think. There's loads more, but we'd end up just talking for hours and hours and hours. We would.
Okay, so as we wrap up today's episode, I want to say a huge thank you to yourself, Michael, being our guest, and for sharing your invaluable insights into the current market lending conditions, and your expertise and passion for creative finance are truly quite inspiring, I have to say. I've seen a few of your deals you put together and pretty impressive. Now, Michael will be joining us again in sometime in May, and he's going to talk through the different types of lending that's available and kind of how to best position yourself when you're applying for that lending. So, to our listeners, be sure to stay tuned for more exciting episodes filled with lots of tips and lots of education. Until next time, happy investing.